Well everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the iPad Pro first generation and see how this specific iPad holds up in 2023. Now what's funny about this iPad is that this specific one came out in a few different sizes. So it came out as a 12.9-inch model back in 2015, I believe, and then in 2016 it ended up coming out in a smaller 9.7-inch display model. Now what was very interesting about this approach was that it was a brand new type of styling and a brand new approach from Apple. Before they had things like the iPad Air, they had the iPad mini, and they had the standard iPad, but they didn't really go up to a Pro iPad. They had MacBook Pros as well, but they didn't have a Pro iPad yet. So this was their first foray into it, and what better way of going about it than creating one of the biggest iPads Apple has ever made, which was that 12.9-inch massive iPad. Now, personally for me, I did end up buying that 9.7-inch model in 2016. Well, the 2016 model, I think I bought it in 2018. And I had a really, really good time with this iPad. In fact, I still use my 9.7-inch iPad Pro every single day. And the reason for that is because I keep it on the side as somewhat of like a third display. I usually just have it playing a video or something like that. Mostly it's just like a security camera thing so I can view all my cameras in my house at the same time. And I enjoy it. I like it a lot. I don't really use it all the time like that anymore. But when I do, it's actually surprising how fast this thing holds up still. The battery life is actually pretty good on this iPad now, and it just has still getting software updates, which is pretty insane. If this thing were to stop, 2 years ago, I think it would have been understandable. But the fact that these iPads have continued to get software support is pretty insane. And there are rumors stating that it's probably even going to get iPadOS 17, which is even crazier. Now, I would probably recommend not buying an iPad like this, but if you want to buy some iPads I would recommend buying this year, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, like I stated, this iPad, 2 different sizes. That 12.9-inch model was crazy big, but that 9.7-inch model was fairly much the same of what you'd expect from that other iPad and like the base iPads during that time. Of course, this thing had a better display for the most part. It had True Tone as well, which was really nice. And even looking at it now, the colors are still very good on an iPad like this, which is actually very cool. Now, you may look at this iPad and it definitely looks like an older iPad for sure, but I will say it's not ugly. I'm looking at my iPad, Pro 1 right now and it still looks pretty good. But definitely this thing has a lot of bezel around it. You have that Touch ID sensor, which is great. But nowadays, we have way less bezel on an iPad like this, which is honestly fairly relevant to keep in mind. So, in my opinion, this is a really, really big thing to keep in mind that this iPad is outdated, but it definitely doesn't look ugly by any means. Now, you also have the Lightning port at the bottom as well, which is great. The latest iPad Pros have USB-C, but still it's very cool that you have an iPad like this that, still has a Lightning. You have a headphone jack on this iPad too, which is very good. And on the back, you have this standard aluminum back. You have the Apple logo right in the center. You have the camera on the top left. Now what's funny is, pretty much since these first couple of iPad Pros, Apple has made sure that the camera stands out the most. Now we have the big massive camera modules, and even on like our iPad mini, we now have like a camera that is a little bit more distinct. These cameras, I think Apple was trying to make them look very small or push them in the corner so they aren't as big or as main of a focus, but now they've done the exact opposite. So this was their first approach to it, and I think this was a pretty good looking iPad for sure, at least on the back. Now that kind of covers it up on the outside. I think it looks great. You do have a pretty solid feeling iPad for sure, and I think the body of this thing still looks very, very good in 2023. Now, moving on to the camera side of things, like I said, this thing has a single camera setup on the back. And this whole entire iPad is very similar to something like an iPhone 6s. So this has been kind of the closest thing I've been kind of able to, make sense to it, at least from my eyes. So this iPad, first of all, had a 12 megapixel standard camera on the back, and it had a 5 megapixel standard camera on the front. Now you could do 4K at 30 on the back, and you could do 1080p on the front, and it's not a bad camera. I still think it's kind of good, but definitely when it's compared to something like an iPhone, 14 or something like that, it's definitely not on the same ballpark at all. But this camera was pretty much in line with something like the iPhone 6s, and the iPhone 6s was pretty much this, main flagship of that time. So that is a very cool thing that you're getting here. At that moment, you were getting almost the same exact type of camera that you were getting on something like an iPhone 6s, which was the main flagship. So I think that is a very cool thing that you were getting on this type of iPad for sure. Now, the photos and videos you're going to take on this thing aren't really going to be life-changing, but I still think it's a fairly decent camera on an iPad for the most part. So in terms of the camera, that kind of covers it up there. Now, in terms of the software and the longevity, this is also another crazy thing about this, iPad as well. And when you're getting an iPad like this, you probably wouldn't expect that a 2016 tablet is still supported with software, but that is exactly what the case is. You are still getting an iPad that is still supported with software, which is crazy. But on top of that, it's probably still going to be supported potentially with iPadOS 17, which is another crazy thing. You wouldn't think that an iPad from 2016 is still going to be getting software support, but it could be, and I think that's going to be a very beautiful thing. If Apple ends up doing that, I'll be very, very happy with this iPad. I would have been happy if it would have stopped on iPadOS 15, to be honest, but now that we might be getting iPadOS 17, these iPad Pros from 2016 were very, very good investments if you were able to pick them up, because they got so many software updates. So from that perspective, that covers it up there. On the performance side, this thing internally had that Apple A9X chip inside of it with 2GB of RAM. Now, the thing I will tell you about these iPad Pros is that it definitely wasn't a bad performing iPad. In fact, it was one of the fastest performing iPads for a few generations. Even when the iPad Pro 10.5-inch model came out, that thing only had like a little bit of a faster chipset than this iPad. I would say the thing that maybe outdates this chipset a lot more with this iPad not only would be the chipset but the RAM. 2GB of RAM is kind of outdated, and considering this thing was more similar to an iPhone 6S during that time, I mean, it's definitely kind of showing its age a little bit. Actually, when I say a little bit, I mean quite a bit. Games that you're going to play on this thing are fairly, not the fastest. You're definitely going to be seeing its age from that perspective, but I think that's kind of expected when you're getting a device like this. This iPad is not going to be handling a lot of things you throw at it, and I think that's completely understandable. I would still say with an iPad Pro 1, if you're doing basic things like how I'm using my current iPad just to watch things on it, or sometimes I will open up another application, but a majority of the time it's just sitting on a desk like I'm looking at it now, and it's just, I'm able to just see things that are going on with it. And the thing about this that I like the most is that it's still getting app updates, so it's not like very outdated. All the applications that are still supported on the latest iPads are still supported on here. So anytime there's an app update, I'm not getting any errors like, you have to be on a certain iOS version or iPadOS version. I'm not getting that at all. So that's a very good thing about this iPad as well. And the battery life has been pretty good. Of course, it could be better, but I think it's been a solid performing iPad in terms of battery life as well. And to kind of sum up this whole entire video, what I'll tell you is, this would not be the first iPad I would recommend buying at all anymore. This would be an iPad that if you have right now, definitely keep for as long as you want to. But if you have to go out of your way to buy an iPad, this would definitely not be one of the ones I would recommend buying anymore. Mostly because the latest iPads have gone down in value in terms of in the used market. So you can buy an iPad 9, an iPad 8, or an iPad 7, and those iPads are probably going to be better than this specific one. So there isn't really a reason to buy an iPad Pro 1 anymore. You're much better off buying something like an iPad Pro 9, not the iPad Pro 9, the iPad 9, iPad 8, an iPad Air 4, like one of those types of iPads from 2018 to like 2021 if you want to save the most amount of money. Those would make the most amount of sense to me. Buying an iPad Pro 1 is probably not worth buying anymore, but if you have it, you might as well keep it until iPadOS 17 comes out. If it gets it, you can keep it longer. If not, then you can go and upgrade. So that kind of covers it up from there. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that will mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.